10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Roger, roll, Challenger.
It looked like a perfect launch, but 73 seconds into the flight, the Challenger space shuttle was to suffer a devastating explosion, killing all 7 astronauts.
Flight GC, we've had
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
Flight Fido, go ahead. RSO reports vehicle exploded. Copy.
If I were to go through the list of the astronauts that are on board, I probably would crack my voice and tears would form again. And yeah, I do get very emotional because of the fact that human lives were lost needlessly. Because I never considered it an accident, and I will never consider it an accident. It was predetermined what would happen, and people just did not listen.
No one regrets more than I the Challenger accident. It was my hardware that I was responsible for that caused that failure. But given the data I had at the time that we flew the Challenger, as we had the previous vehicles, there was no other engineering decision that could be made based on the data that was available to us.
In the weeks following the Challenger explosion, NASA managers expressed bewilderment as to the causes. It would be a manager from Morton Thiokol, a key rocket supplier for the shuttle, who eventually began to disclose crucial events that lay behind the disaster. He attended a special session of the presidential inquiry, called to discuss the possible effects of low temperature on the solid rocket motor, or SRM.
It was known that the temperatures were predicted to be below freezing during the night and into the morning of the 28th. As a matter of routine, those of us working the launch asked our technical people and our contractors what concerns we may have for low temperatures. Faculty presented to us the fact that the lowest temperature we had flown an O-ring or a case joint was 53 degrees. And they pointed out that we'd be outside of our experience base. After hearing the discussion, we all concluded that there was no problems with the predicted temperatures for the SRM, and I received a document from Thiokol to that effect, that there were no adverse consequences expected due to temperature during the night of the 27th.
Well, my thought is, if it's all right with the other members of the commission, that we have a public session tomorrow, and we'll go on as long as we can.
Mr. Chairman, Al McDonald of Morton Thiokol wanted to make a point.
Yes, I want to say a point about the meeting. That meeting was set up by Thiokol to review data and concerns about lower temperatures and the basis for that concern. The recommendation at that time, based on the data that was sent out from Thiokol, was not to launch below 53 degrees Fahrenheit.
You said not to launch below 53 degrees? And what was the actual temperature?
The actual temperature predicted at that time was 29 degrees.
Could you stand up again and say that a little louder so we can hear it? I'm not sure that we all understood what you said.
Yes, sir.
This film tells the story of how serious flaws in the shuttle had long been known about, and of the struggle that took place to try and avert the fatal launch. The shuttle was sold to the American public on economy and reliability. It was supposed to fly 24 missions a year, but the reality was often very different. The previous mission to Challenger, known as STS-51C, had been delayed a record 7 times. Challenger itself had slipped back 4 times, jeopardizing the key reason for the flight, the much publicized presidential Teacher in Space program. If the shuttle didn't lift off within 2 days, Krista McAuliffe, the teacher who'd been chosen from 11,000 hopeful applicants, would have to give her lessons from space on a weekend to empty classrooms. But as they tried again on the morning of January the 27th, the launch hit further problems.
Say again, please.
Good morning, Allison.
We've got an exterior hatch lock that isn't closed.
OTC MS2 radio check.
Let's suck it on the orbiter net and work this problem.
Repeated mechanical delays, combined with unusually foul weather at the Cape, eventually made it impossible to launch.
This is the launch director. We are no-go.
Good morning,
Standing
Krista.
down for
Hope we go
today.
today. Good morning.
Looks like we missed the window for the day, gentlemen.
I'll advise you back tomorrow.
Okay, we're bringing the crew out now.
Okay, copy that.
I think we want to know particularly if there's anything related to the predicted low temperatures that might cause concerns. If you call up your people, we'll meet in conference in 10.
NASA engineers now recalled that a previous flight at low temperature had led to problems with the solid rocket boosters, or SRBs, which lift the shuttle into space. They got onto the contractor over 2,000 miles away.
From launch director that we are going to scrub for today.
Let's hold our breath for another day.
That the people will be coming out to the pad to...
We got temperature predictions for tomorrow's launch. 25 to 29 degrees. Cancel your Florida vacation. Problem, Roger?
It could well be, yeah.
Okay. We got to get back to the Cape on this, so you want to gather anything, I'll go get Bob, and we'll hash it out in my office.
Morton Thiokol had won the contract to build the solid rocket boosters with a highly competitive bid. Roger Beaujolais and Arnie Thompson were their leading experts on a key component in the SRB. Their concerns related to its design. The booster was made up of cylindrical sections. The joints between the sections were sealed by 2 circular rubber rings, called the primary and secondary O-rings, each a centimeter thick and 12 meters long. But right from the first launch, it had been found that the SRB was flexing in an unexpected way, and the O-rings were having to perform a function for which they were not designed. Milliseconds after ignition, the walls of the SRB bow outward, opening a gap between the O-rings and the outer wall. To maintain the seal, the primary and secondary rings have to expand fast enough to close the gap. They must do this in less than a 50th of a second, or hot gases can escape. Known as blow-by, this caused dangerous erosion of the O-rings. But NASA management had so far defined the problems as acceptable risk and continued flying.
In January '85, I personally inspected the damage on the booster joints, and they're by far the worst we've ever had. That was also the coldest launch to date, 53 degrees, and I don't think that's coincidental. Now we're hearing from Kennedy that they're proposing to launch at 26, 30 degrees. Well, that's 25 degrees lower than we've ever launched at, and I'm worried.
I have to agree.
We've done tests at 100 degrees, 75 degrees, 50 degrees, and we know that at 50 it's much more sluggish than at 75. Do you know what happens to seal joints at ignitions as next to freezing?
Well, that's the point. We're 25 degrees out of our experience base. We shouldn't fly.
Bob, the O-ring, it's eroding at the same time that it's trying to seal. And it's a race between will it erode more than the time allowed for it to seal. Well, we've won that race 24 times in the past. But at 25 degrees, it's never been tried.
I'm with you. You're talking about Thiokol pulling the shuttle for the first time ever. Well, we'd better ready up a hell of a presentation.
Bob Lund relayed his engineers' concerns back to their manager at the Cape, Alan MacDonald.
Make sure we're in a position to recommend a launch temperature. Just don't recommend a launch. Bob, this has got to be an engineering decision. No, there's still time. There's plenty of time.
Roger Beaujolais and Arnie Thompson's concerns with the O-rings were long-standing. Following the discovery of O-ring erosion in earlier missions, Beaujolais wrote a memo to his superiors in July 1985, summarizing the dangers.
It is my honest and very real fear that if we do not take immediate action to dedicate a team to solve the problem, then we stand in jeopardy of losing a flight.
But Beaujolais' memo was confined to Thiokol and never shown to NASA.
People will be coming out to the pad to...
The concern about the low temperatures led to a long-distance telephone conference, scheduled to begin at 5:45 Eastern Standard Time. Thiokol engineers in Utah and at the Cape struggled against the clock to prepare a no-flight recommendation, their first in the history of the shuttle. But it was unusual to call a meeting so late, and it took time to gather important personnel. Larry Malloy, NASA's manager for the solid rocket boosters and one of the key people to appraise the Thiokol presentation, had to be called back from his hotel.
It was another red faces day for NASA as a trouble-free liftoff proved too much of a challenge for Challenger. And with the weather closing in, it doesn't look good for tomorrow either.
George Hardy, deputy director at NASA's Marshall Space Center in Alabama and a highly influential figure, was called back from home. But Leon Ray, who had been one of Marshall's most outspoken critics of the O-ring design and who might have played a significant role in the teleconference, was never called.
We get a little cold enough down here and they want to shut the shuttle system down.
Well, I'm going to want to know why, and I'm not accepting it on the basis of any hand-wringing emotion.
The pressures of cancelling a launch weren't simply on Thiokol's engineers.
Mason?
There were important implications for the managers, too. Just 1 week earlier, Thiokol's exclusive contract with NASA to build the solid rocket boosters, worth $1 billion, had come up for renewal.
Well, if that's what they think, okay.
Larry, good to see you. Back again.
Yeah. Stan?
Yeah.
Cold out there.
Sure is.
You're going to be fueling up in next to no time. There's got to be an easier way to make a living.
The telephone conference finally began at 8:15.
Essentially, our position is this. An engineering recommendation for caution. A recommendation not to launch.
Roger, Beaujolais, Thiokol. Good evening.
Basically, if erosion penetrates the primary O-ring seal, there is a higher probability of no secondary seal in the steady-state condition. Now, the cold will make the ring harder, and the harder it is, well, it's like trying to shove a brick into a crack instead of a sponge. Cutting to the chase, gentlemen, our concerns are these. The cold temperature may slow us down. Slow us down just enough so that we won't get a high probability of sealing. And the secondary seal may not be capable of being pressurized. And the result will be irreversible and catastrophic.
And that's the bottom line of everything that we're presenting. The cold makes it too dangerous to launch. It's as simple as that. We shouldn't launch.
If our numbers are correct, and we feel good about them, then we'd be firing at 29 degrees, and that's 24 below our lowest experience base. Space Transport System 51C was fired at 53 degrees. And that's the lowest temperature we've seen, and substantially the worst blow-by of gas.
Telling us exactly what?
The time for the primary O-ring to come across the groove and be extruded into the seal gap would have to be increased. And if it is, then the action of the primary seal could be compromised. And the secondary seal may not be in position to seal the joint.
Larry Malloy. Now, I got to tell you, fellas, your pitch just doesn't hang together. When you consider it all within the context of all data available, your conclusions just don't add up, Thiokol. Now, how can you tell me that damage to STS-51C was a result of cold, when your second worst case was at 75 degrees, room temperature? Do you see my point? I mean, O-ring damage has had a lot of causes. So what evidence do you have that damage to STS-51C was a result of cold? Can you quantify your concerns?
Well, I can't quantify them, no. I've got no data to quantify them. But I do know that we're moving away from goodness in our current database. Yes, there was blow-by at a room temperature launch, but not as much, not nearly as much as there was at 53 degrees.
We've been flying since STS-2 with a known condition in the joints that's been duly considered and accepted by THICL. It's been accepted by me. It's been accepted by all levels of NASA management through the flight readiness review process. This is a condition that we have had since STS-2 that has been accepted. And blow-by to the O-rings cannot be correlated to the temperature by these data.
That is indeed telling us that lower temperature is a factor. I inspected the flown hardware myself. Now, you're asking me for data to support my claim. Well, I've got none other than what I'm offering here, but I've been trying to get resilience data, Arnie Thompson and myself both, since last October.
You're asking us to accept a 53-degree cutoff. For 19 days in December and 14 so far this month, the ambient temperature has been below that. We were going to launch this morning, and the ambient temperature at 8 a.m. was 37 degrees. But THICL, you did not raise any concerns then.
This is way out of our temperature experience. This is way, way colder than anything we've encountered. This is a good 25 degrees lower. And we are counseling caution as a consequence.
Is that the end of the presentation?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Okay, then I'd like to ask Mr. Kilminster for your recommendation.
Well, Larry, THICL position is this. A recommendation not to launch.
I think we did a fine job because we had one definitive test, albeit preliminary. There was one definitive test that showed that the seals perform more poorly at cool weather than at room temperature weather. And as an engineer, I can tell you I only need one piece of negative data to shut something down from going forward. And that's what I tried to do.
An engineer evaluating a decision like this one has to rely on the data that's available to support the decision. In this case, there were no data that supported a conclusion of more extensive O-ring damage at the colder temperature. On the contrary, there were data that said that it wasn't as extensive at lower temperatures as it was at some higher temperatures.
As the astronauts slept, unaware of the problems, the meeting carried on.
What you're proposing to do is to generate new launch criteria on the eve of a launch after we've successfully flown with the existing criteria 24 times. THICL, you are contradicting the position you took after STS-51C when you checked those rings and you said that the safety factor was very much intact. You guys took the position then that the primary would seal with 3 times the erosion at 53 degrees. Now, all I'm asking is it logical? Is it truly logical that it has to be 53 degrees to fly? I mean, my God, THICL, when do you want me to launch? Next April?
I've been working 13 years on this project. This is the only time, the one and only time we've ever asked for a delay. Usually we're breaking our backs to beat the schedule.
At this point, George Hardy, a strong-minded and powerful figure at NASA, was asked for his opinion.
Perhaps we could hear from
George Hardy at Marshall. What do you think of all this?
I've listened to everything that's been said.
Frankly, I'm appalled by THICL's no-launch position. But I won't agree to launch against the contractor's recommendation.
Joe, any comments?
Asking for a 5-minute caucus offline.
We'd like to propose at this point a 5-minute caucus offline so we can reevaluate the data.
Okay. We got a ground crew just starting to get ready to tank up. We need an answer as soon as possible.
Let's go get some coffee.
As preparations continued for the morning launch, an extraordinary argument broke out at Morton Thiokol. After NASA's robust response to their presentation, Beaujolais and Thompson now found their recommendation being questioned by their own general manager, Gerald Mason.
We've been flying with the possibility of blow-by and erosion for a long time now, because we've been confident that these conditions have been acceptable risks. Now, what we have to focus on...
The acceptance and success of previous flights should not be taken as proofs of safety. Erosion and blow-by are not what the design expected. They are warnings that something is wrong.
What we have to focus on is the temperature issue, and separate that out from the blow-by and erosion risks that we've been comfortable taking up
Jesus
until now.
Christ!
As Mr. Malloy says, we've had problems with warm engines as well as cold engines, so we do not have temperature correlation.
You're asking us to prove that the seal will fail. Well, we can't do that. That's impossible. But the cold could increase the probability of failure. Now, look, here's the joint. Now, you know that. Now, what if this happens and that happens? What do you think happened? Why can't we just wait another day? Is that too much to ask? Jesus. Bob.
Look at the photographs. Look at the physical evidence. This is showing us the temperature is a discriminator.
We asked for 5 minutes. We've been getting comments for near on 20. Seems to me that everyone said what they think. Said it moreover several times. If anyone's got anything new to add, I think we ought to get it out on the table, but there's nothing to be gained by just rehashing. We spent a lot of time here looking at numbers and so forth and calculations. And we're going to have to take that information and do some management with it. It's time to make a management decision, because we're just spinning our wheels here otherwise. Intensity of argument's one thing. Data's another. I don't feel we have a strong enough case. And we can talk about intuition and hunches and the feeling that it's headed in the wrong direction, but our data is not conclusive. And I cannot disagree with Mr. Malloy. My position is we recommend launch.
What?
Cal, what do you think?
I think we're okay to launch.
My feeling is, it's okay.
Bob, what do you think? Bob, it's time to take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat.
Well, I guess it's all right to launch.
Then I guess we're unanimous.
I was sick when I perceived that the managers were discussing rationale that would change the decision from a no launch to a launch decision. I had felt all along during that whole day that there was essentially 100% probability that it was going to fail if they launched anywhere around the freezing temperature. And that was basically because of what I had witnessed the year before. And I was sick about it, but I was powerless.
MTI assessment of temperature concern on SRM 2551L launch. Temperature data not conclusive on predicting primary O-ring blow-by.
This is shuttle launch control at T-minus 2 hours, 28 minutes and counting. Here comes the 51L flight crew boarding the elevator.
Engineering assessment
for the second time in 2 days.
is that
If the primary seal does not seat, the secondary seal will seat.
pressure will get to secondary seal before the metal parts rotate, which minimizes sealing time.
Ron McNair, pilot Mike Smith, followed by Krista McCullough, feature in space.
MTI recommends STS-51L launch proceed on 28 January 1986. SRM-25 will not be significantly different from SRM-15.
Commander Dick Scobie now in the White Room, along with Mike Smith, who is the pilot.
Are there any disagreements with the Thiokol position? No, well then this meeting is adjourned. You'll let us have that immediately in writing, will you?
T-minus 7 minutes, 30 seconds. And the ground launch sequencer has started retracting the orbiter crew access arm.
They just rammed it down our throats.
8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Good roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading downrange. Engines beginning throttling down now at 94%. Normal throttles for most of the plane, 104%.
Challenger, go with throttle up.
Roger, go with throttle up.
Fido trajectory. Go ahead. Flight GC, we've had negative contact, lost downlink. Okay, all operators, watch your data carefully.
The Presidential Commission eventually determined that the cold had frozen the O-rings, allowing a fatal leak of gas. This, coupled with severe crosswinds, sealed the fate of the Challenger.
Horrible, terrible disaster and a tragedy, but not an accident. This was foreseen, talked about, ruled upon, and decided not to go, and then it was overruled by the very people who were supposed to place the astronauts in the safest position possible. It could never be called an accident.
I never felt guilt about it. I felt responsibility, and after the cause was pinpointed, I've accepted that, and I'm convinced that given the data that I had, I could have made no other decision, and I just happened to be involved in that accident.
Flight Fido. Go ahead. RSO reports vehicle exploded.
Copy.